And now, the story of a shameless con artist and probable sociopath who made a fortune exploiting animals, the marginalized, and the physically disabled for the amusement of gullible rubes through hollow populist demagoguery. Naturally, he's the hero of the piece. There's like 12 punchlines that could go there this year alone, so take your pick. I don't know how you read a room wrongly enough to look at the last couple years and determine that P.T. Barnum was actually a woke champion of the disenfranchised as a grand idea for your movie, but here we are. And look, I get that this was kind of inevitable, because musicals about putting on a show are appealing to the devout theater crowd who are the main audience for musicals, and if you come up with at least one fairly catchy song about staging a production of anything, which this movie does have, to be fair, it can be performed at the Tonys forever, which makes it a good investment, but Jesus, people, this guy was no Alexander Hamilton, and then again, Alexander Hamilton wasn't exactly Alexander Hamilton either, but okay. In any case, Hugh Jackman is Barnum, the poor son of a tailor who works his way up to wealth and fame by assembling a cadre of human oddities and presenting them as museum attractions, gets distracted by an ill-advised attempt to go legit, makes good by getting back to his roots by the time the finish rolls around, and blah blah, etc, etc. Generic showbiz hero's journey that the screenplay works overtime to convince you makes him Willy Wonka instead of the Wolf of Wall Street, because if you rub enough fairy dust on it, people will always assume that anyone who started out poor but became rich is the good guy, because they'd like to do that as well. And hey, you can't say he's not a compelling subject for a biopic, musical or otherwise. He was a complete bastard, but he was a complete bastard who lived an interesting life. Fair enough. But I feel it takes a special kind of brazen cluelessness to take it and say, okay, but what if our premise is that this guy was basically Gandhi but for sideshow performers because his turning them into human attractions made them famous and therefore confident? Sure, yeah, human oddity performers of that era did in fact tend to have fascinatingly nuanced views of their place in the popular culture, but that doesn't make Barnum the hero of the story. That's like doing a movie where chickens keep singing about how grateful they are for Colonel Sanders. Hugh, Mr. Jackman, please don't make that movie. Now look, a movie is not about what it's about how it's about it. That's not my quote, that's Roger Ebert's, and if you run it back in your head and think about it, it makes sense. Fine. But the problem with The Greatest Showman isn't so much that it tries to valorize a thoroughly unvalorous person by indulging in a level of disingenuous bullshittery that, well, the actual P.T. Barnum probably wouldn't have tried to sell with a straight face. The problem is that it can't be bothered to do it well. There's nothing fresh, original, or dynamic about anything in this movie. It's the most generic treatment of the subject possible, even amidst the audacity of its historical revisionism. So there's nothing to distract from the cognitive dissonance of seeing this obvious story of scheming and exploitation presenting as a jolly, life-affirming endeavor. And I suppose you could overcome the shitty premise if the songs and the dancing were good enough that nobody would care, but The Greatest Showman doesn't even really have that going for it either. Jackman is a consummate performer in this kind of role, Zendaya has real range, and Zac Efron is on hand for no less than 3 different musical numbers, all based around Jackman tossing him various props to signify his ascendance as the new, hyper-handsome, in-shape guy who can also sing and dance. But apart from the almost obnoxiously catchy title number, there's not really a winner in the whole bunch, and that's kind of a problem since the only reason to make a movie like this, apart from helping Jackman lunge for post-Wolverine screen viability, is to get people to like the songbook enough to stage a Broadway run later. And make no mistake, this is Jackman's show, and that it falls on its face can't really take away from how apparent his chops still are. Buried amid the forgettable plot and obscene sense of historical perspective are individual moments that make you think this might have been a good movie in some other universe. And that's really all about him. Everyone else sort of fades into the background, save for a few of the sideshow folks who get songs of their own, most notably Kayla Settle as the bearded lady, who kind of feels like she could have been the main character in a good version of this story. Michelle Williams disappears into the background as Barnum's wife, while Rebecca Ferguson turns up as Jenny Lind, but doesn't sing any songs that Jenny Lind sang, to my understanding, which is weird. And the most thankless role of all, of course, goes to Paul Sparks as the snooty elitist theater critic who shows up to do the Walter Peck thing and voice all of the perfectly valid criticisms of Barnum's operation in the language of downward-punching classism, so we'll get the point that the guy charging people to gawk at birth defects is actually a champion of the working class. The angle is bad, but the presentation is so much worse. I really thought we were getting out of this garbage fire of a year without any further disasters, guys, but The Greatest Showman is complete trash. 1 star, shut it down.